You're listening to the Flow Theory Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the Flow Theory Podcast. Former Ohio football quarterback Josh Febus, a quarterback out of Dublin Kaufman in Columbus, Ohio, threw for over 1,300 yards his senior year, rushed for over 800 yards as well. Josh, thanks so much for coming on the show, my man.
Oh, Wade, man, that's a kind introduction. I appreciate being on here, and it's good to catch up with you.
Absolutely. Josh, one of the biggest things I ask all guys that come on the podcast is one of the main themes of this podcast. It's all about flow and being in the zone. So, Mike Vick in his 30 for 30, he talks about the moment in a game at Virginia Tech when the players were running at full speed, but they were moving in slow motion for him visually. Were there any sort of moments like that for you during your football career, either at Ohio or Dublin Kaufman?
Absolutely. I mean, a handful of experiences. I mean, at all levels and at all times. I mean, you know it because, like, from a quarterback perspective, a lot of the things that you think about that you consciously have to do, they become reactionary as you do them enough. But then to take it a step further when you're in the zone and you realize, hey, you're not even thinking, you're just flawlessly doing, and then you're doing it so smooth to where you get that momentum, you get that to where you're comfortable, and it's almost like a CD that there's a lot of times where it might be skipping or, hey, it's rotating, it's playing, but is it as smooth as it can be? And being in the zone and the ability to dial that in to where, hey, there's a post route. I just see it and it's done. And you're going through your reads to where, you're not even thinking about it. And then ultimately you're so focused in the sense that you don't have the tunnel vision, but it's so clear. And really that's what it comes down to, is the clarity that Mike Vick talks about, to where you're doing all the right things, you're trusting yourself. And I really think that plays a lot into it as well, as the trust aspect of really just believing and letting the muscle memory do it for you, and then just letting go. And then from there, you're in the zone, and when it shuts off, you never know what that signature moment's going to be. Maybe it's a hard hit. Maybe it's, a blitz that didn't get picked up, that you juke left, and every other time in the zone you juke left, it's worked for you. But this time, hey, it's a game ender. And, you never know what starts it and what ends it, but you can feel it when you're in it. And there's no doubt about it.
Can you describe for me certain moments for you where you felt like you were in the zone?
Yeah, I mean, I think of, for instance, like the junior year in high school, there was a third down conversion that we needed. It was late in the game to where it was a trap. We were a wing T school, believe it or not, at that point in time, and a belly trap. It was a give. It wasn't even a read. And for some reason, they got penetration. It was a no-brainer to where you pulled it. And I pulled it, and I went around the left side, and I scampered for, I think, 70 yards. And it ended up being the game winner. Like I said, it was late in the game. But that was just one of those things to where it wasn't reaction, and it wasn't really thought about. It was just something that intuitively came to me. And I did it, and it paid off. But if you look at it as film, as a lot of these things, when you watch the highlight films, how'd that guy do that? And you think of Braxton Miller when he hit that spin move against Virginia Tech in that game opener.
Oh, that was beautiful.
That's a clear-cut example of someone that, hey, they're obviously highly trained, they're highly athletic, and to be able to hit the circle button like that he obviously was, feeling some type of way in the zone. And that's how those plays, I think, really come together.
Yeah, I agree. Phoebus, you were talking to me about the time you hit Levon Brazil on a seam route in, was it one of the spring practices, or was it a spring scrimmage? Talk to me about that moment.
Yeah, so I think it was actually summer 7-on-7. And if you look back at that time in OU, the receiving core, you had some staples there, and you had some young stud talents that I don't think OU had really seen before. And I'm referring to Taylor Price, who also went on to be a third-round draft pick, and then Levon Brazil, who arguably had a better, NFL career than Taylor did. And,
absolutely.
And with Levon, that was a zone to where, hey, the read, what took you there. That you did. It wasn't even that you were going through the processes or okay, check here, check here. It's where even if you watch film, you can see people going through their cognitive, evaluations where, hey, how seamless and how fluid is it? And that's a sign of, hey, they're just checked in and they're really good at what they do. And we know with me, that wasn't the latter. It wasn't you're really good at what you do, but it was the ability to see that. And then with LeVon streaking down, hey, to put it right there, it's one that, hey, it's a touch throw, but yet at the same time, that accuracy and to get that angle, it's just something that you had to be, I guess, in the moment to do. To where, hey, it's a lot like my golf game. That I wish I could just bottle that every time, and I think that's what you referred to when you talk about the zone. But with Brazil and the talent that he had, I mean, it made it pretty easy. But that was one. Those summer 7-on-7s were super competitive. I mean, that was where people showed their character. I mean, Lou Holtz used to say, at the beginning of spring ball, he wouldn't post any rosters or whatnot. And this could be true or not, or just, myth. But to where, hey, he didn't post any depth charts, but he'd say starting, offense, get out there. And normally he'd say, 90-some% of the time, the 11 that went out there, they ended up becoming, successful for him, much less the starters for that year. Because people pretty much know a lot of times when they look in the mirror, you can't lie to yourself. And where your rack and stack, where your weaknesses are, and if you're realistic with yourself, which a lot of people are, they'll check you. That's one of those things to where with LeVon you could see it right away, and you knew, hey, this kid keeps stepping up because he was super young, and he had worked. I think Star Jones was his high school quarterback, who ended up being a stud and was definitely a good recruit. But I joked around and said, LeBron, he's just the fast twitch that we've seen. I mean, the only athletes that you really saw it out of were those that, really excelled, or those that were transfers in from the bigger schools.
Yeah, dude, LeVon Brazil, he was one of the most highly touted recruits during the Frank Solich era at Ohio for sure. I remember when Coach Mason landed him out of Florida. I mean, it was a huge, huge deal. And I remember watching his tape. I mean, some guys, when they just jump out at you on tape. And LeVon was one of those guys, man. And he was a great player in the pros. He kind of had some issues towards, the end of his career, but goddamn, that guy was really good. And I mean, he set a lot of Ohio records, and not surprising, man. He was something else.
Yeah, he was, and right on cue. Another talented guy that he ran at 4.2 at Ohio State's camp, and was really unheralded, in a sense, because he played at a wing T school in Hilliard-Darby. But Taylor Price, I mean, I remember the shoe. And I forget what year, 07 or 08, when we played them real close. And people don't realize the turnovers in that game. We turned the ball over 5 times their one. They were out without Beanie Wells, and you had a young PP and a Beckman, and they would go on to get smoked by USC the next week. But
they did get smoked.
Bad. I mean, they just didn't know what hit them. But you look at Taylor Price, obviously, unfortunately, Theo Scott went down with a collarbone injury when Lawrence Wilson just suplexed him. But it was one of those things to where all day, and anyone can go back and look at the film, Taylor Price made easy work of Malcolm Jenkins, who really wanted to get physical and obviously would play him, over a decade in the league and as a safety with that physicality, but an All-American corner. And you watch Taylor stack on top all day. It's where Boo actually came in, Boo Jackson. He might have missed a couple of throws, if I recall, but I mean, it's neither here nor there, other than that Taylor Price absolutely really had the upper hand. And that's when I realized, because I had a front row seat, like I mentioned, to all this talent. And I had a passion for it. I mean, I'd been buying Street and Smith magazine since I was little. It was never my goal to go to the NFL. It just was always my goal to play Division I football. And, I took that in talent evaluation very seriously, and seeing the eclectic group of all, walks of life, of all high school careers, of all recruiting levels come into Ohio University at that point in time as Frank Solich's first recruiting class. It was just funny to see, because a little bit, as time went on, I felt like the catcher off of Bull Durham, the guy that just never got called up from AAA, but he'd always see the young cats come in, throw with them, get to know them and different things. And just that locker room, it's just, I was a strong personality. There's no secret there, but to see that play out, and Taylor Price and LeVon Brazil, and Riley Dunlop was another one. And then you had Bakari Bussey, who came from a strong pedigree. Really, you just saw it little by little. The guys got a little bit taller. They got a little bit faster. They had a little bit better of a build. It wasn't so much of a project to where you started to see what Coach Solich was doing and to see the caliber changing. That doesn't mean that you didn't have sleepers. I mean, Calvin McRae was on the show. Obviously, one of the best college running backs out of the eye. To see that magic up close when, his patience and the way he could hit it, because he wasn't the most physical back, and that's not a secret, and that's not knocking Calvin, but the vision and the fluidity in which he flowed through the hole and knew when to hit it. I mean, I would put some of his film up with maybe some of the better running backs that Coach Solich had at Nebraska. And
it's funny that you mentioned that, Febus, because Calvin actually talked about that in the podcast, how Coach Solich mentioned that Calvin was as good as a lot of the running backs that he had at Nebraska. And Calvin said how that was such a big confidence boost for him. So it's very funny that you said the exact same statement.
You can see it. I mean, we mentioned off there, growing up watching Big Red, and like I said, the passion that I had, Nebraska power, Nebraska football. When I signed with Coach Solich, we were an I program. We were running that speed option, where the fullback led out front. It wasn't a midline. It wasn't a triple. It was, a true Nebraska speed option, and a lot of the same plays to where you could see it, and I was nowhere near Tommy Frazier or Eric Krause, even a Scott Frost. But the grit that Nebraska represented. And Coach Solich, actually, when I went on my visit there, the one thing he liked about me was my demeanor. That might have changed. I'm sure Coach Solich would tell you that. But my serious demeanor and aggressiveness, and I love that. And I think the one thing about that is we realized you couldn't line up against BCS schools, which was BCS at the time. And really, when it came to a recruiting level, the recruits, they paid attention to those big non-conference games. You just linemen and bodies in general, no one raises their hand. It's just not a mentality to raise their hand and say, I want to be an offensive lineman. I want to be a defensive lineman. Now they're more prone to be defensive linemen. But, to say, hey, with the spread system, with just society in general, the offensive line position is one to where you don't have those abundancy of just nose to the grindstone, power wreckers that you had at Nebraska. And no crap, I got it, Nebraska versus OU. But, even to pick out of the Youngstown crowd, the Western PA crowd, really the Rust Belt crowd, you would think that you still had it. And by no means, at OU did we establish a pipeline to where we were Nebraska of the offensive line. But I think that was a lot of the thought process of when Coach Solich came, is that everyone was going so much to the spread to where, hey, the opposite of that was lining up under center, going I formation, and just making you stop me every single time, with grit, strength, and determination. And I think ultimately it came real quick that, hey, you might have been beat at birth in a lot of those BCS non-conference games, even though we played them tough. I mean, the only non-conference game I can remember getting blown out was against Miami and Chase Daniels. Other than that,
Missouri, yeah.
Other than that, I think we pretty much played everyone close. Now, Southern Miss, I wouldn't necessarily call that. They weren't a Power 5, but they got off on us down the stretch. But
they got us with that exact same play that Central Michigan burned us on. You remember? They ran a post across the middle, and they got Michael Graham in the same matchup. They saw that on film, and he had gotten beat in the MAC championship game on that same play, and they saw that. And football, it's like a battlefield, and then on tape, man, those coaches knew what they were doing, man. They got that same matchup, and they got him. That was a big play in that Southern Miss game, man.
It was, and Damian Fletcher went on to, I think that's recall the back name, and he went on to have a all-time leading rusher, I believe, at Southern Miss there he might still be, but see him and then see, yeah, you're exactly right. I forget, was it Snead or something, the running back up at Central? It's a matchup game, and I think that's the maturation that you see. Obviously, you hear so much called out as just the personnel and the chess pieces, to where how do you flush that down? Because obviously it falls off the plates, where that might play out more in the high-end game, but to get those true consistent matchups where, yes, at Clemson, I pretty much know, for a lot of their starting 11, what I'm going to get in that level of play and that consistency of play. But in the MAC, I mean, you run into the wrong guy at the wrong week, and he'll look like a completely different player on film besides, some of the more consistent players. And I think that's one where the matchup game in the MAC didn't play out like some of the conversations I've had with others, like Mitchell in the league and such.
Talk to me about your recruiting process, Febus, and how exactly you ended up at Ohio.
Yeah, so Dublin Coffin was a school. At that point in time, back in 2005 is when I graduated from high school. So if you think about it, the spread was relatively newer. True shotgun, zone read, terms that are just, common household terms that any average Joe just can throw around at B-dubs. We were running that at Dublin Coffin back then. And a guy before, 2 years before me was named Brady Quinn. And he was still under center. And that cat was, obviously went on to Notre Dame and really had, a solid career and a top-notch talent first-round draft pick. But that year after, there was a guy by the name of Jack Rafferty.
Oh, God, Jack Rafferty was so good, dude. I remember watching that guy's highlights. He was ridiculous.
And really, he was. I mean, I joke around. I call Austin Everson. I call him the Tim Tebow of the MAC before there was a Tim Tebow. And I call Jack Rafferty, and that spread back in 03, 04. I call him the poor man's Johnny Manziel, because what Johnny won a Heisman Trophy off of is exactly what Jack Rafferty did. And I remember going to a playoff game because I was at a different high school at the time. That, like I said, ran the wing team. We averaged 2 throws a game. And I had gone to camps. I remember going down to NC State, and I roomed with Joe Cox, who started at Georgia. He lived in like the same quad or whatnot.
Oh yeah, I remember him. He was an Elite 11 QB coming out of high school. He went to Independence, the same high school as Chris Leak.
He was right behind Chris Leak, and who his roommate was, like within that same corridor, was Muhammad Massaquoi.
Oh yeah,
and who went to Georgia, and they were Independence, to where Joe was this redhead, but you could tell he was super polished. He had all the skills that you needed. Obviously, he was a grinder and found a way to get, playing time at Georgia. But, he was there. Jonathan Crompton came in, and Crompton, he came in and he was much more of a one-day guy. And it's funny, I mentioned Brady Quinn, and one of the pieces of advice that he always gave me going to camp, look, don't overstay your welcome. It's an evaluation at the end of the day, and you can go there and you can wear a halo and have the honeymoon effect, but the longer you stay, the more and more they're going to try and find things that are wrong with you. So there's a strategy when we talk about the recruiting process. I'll get back on topic, but to where when you go to these camps, before I got recruited by OU, that was when they were going through a coaching change. There was Brian Norris, and at that point in time, they were going from triple option, like he ran at Air Force, and Jim Grove ran before him, to, West Coast under Steve Early. And Steve Early, wanted a guy that was taller than me. He ended up going, getting a commit that ended up at, I think, not Austin, but Tennessee Martin, who we ironically played down the road. But, to where they didn't want anything to do with me. And Pete Germano was the recruiting coordinator for that staff. And, I thought things were done with OU, and there's a name out there that is legend within the OU Athens community, and it's Jason Grooms. And Jason Grooms at that time, a little unknown fun fact, was I think the linebackers coach down at a private school, Elon, which was 1AA. And Jason Grooms and the receiver coach who left at the point in time was recruiting me down at Elon. And I get this random call. I have a great visit, have this random call from OU, and I knew that they had gone through a coaching change, and it was Jerry Godowski. And Jerry Godowski was the quarterback coach, and he said, "Hey, Josh, we took a look at the film. We like what we see." And, going back to, the backstory on the high school program, we ran some option. I ran for 800 yards. And that includes getting sacked, a number of times and over 55 drop balls, because my senior year, the cupboard was pretty dry. And little did I know, I had moved into that to where I didn't have a junior year of film, because I was still at a wing two school. And at Dublin Coffin, I had 1 year, but most folks are committed at the quarterback position. And so I think a little bit of the turnover at OU and the fact that, the film that I had, to where the only other schools that, really were there were, Cincinnati, who at that point in time had a quarterback coach, Dan Enos. and he was really interested. And, Tim Hinton called me and, hey, Josh, offers in the mail, da-da-da-da-da. And no, there wasn't. And Coach Enos came, and they had a commitment pretty quick in Craig Carey, and that went about that way. So Cincinnati fell off very fast. Even though I loved Coach D'Antonio and loved Coach Enos, and they came to Vandalia Butler to watch, and then you had random smatterings of Toledo and Bowling Green and the academies, and it was always my dream, with my dad being a career Army officer, both active and reserve, to look at the academies. I'd been up there before, and to get an appointment to West Point, and then when Brian Nora ironically got fired, he went out to Air Force. And at that point in time, Steve Reagan, their line coach, was recruiting pretty hard. Fisher DeBerry actually came to my house for breakfast. So really it came down to OU and the academy. And with Air Force Academy, they weren't even recruiting me as a quarterback. I think it was more of the rover, safety, linebacker, come in, you're a smart guy, with some, fundamental physicality, baseline physicality that we can mold into. And then, you're not going to fail out of the Air Force Academy. So thing.
Right.
So both of those, and then up at Army, it was Bobby Ross was starting, and Kevin Ross was his OC, his son, and Bobby Ross was doing the whole thing, bringing that pro-style system, and they had just got Kimsey Center built, which I think was $52 million. It was the founder of AOL, was a West Pointer, and he had built this in the sports performance aspect to where this is back in '05. They had it to where like you would have to chop your feet on a mat and keep a certain level of chops, and they'd have, I've seen a little bit more nowadays, but, lights would flash on the board and numbers, and you get your RPM and heart rate, and they were on that, way before. And then the coolest thing is they had like this little dome to where, they would have the scout team wear body cams, and, from your position, say you're a Mike linebacker, scout teamers would run that position, or run that play rather, sorry. And you'd have that mic, that camera from their purview, seeing that, the natural angles that would create, and just another way to get mental reps. And that was super impressive to me. And, it was funny because there was a blizzard during that time. And, at OU, or not OU, at West Point, you don't really get the opportunity to have, much freedom on these college trips because you're already busy, but much less West Point, where it's one of the most secure areas. So during that blizzard, they canceled recruiting activities. I think we got 6 inches of snow. And, the night before, Steve Tovar, who was a Buckeye great, he was the linebackers coach and actually recruiting me. He picks me up. And I just got into, an argument with my dad, which was, at that point in time, not out of the norm, being an 18-year-old know-it-all. And he's like, they're going to get you squared away up there if you keep this up, buddy. Drop me off at the airport. Yeah. I'll see you in 3 weeks or 3 days. I fly up there. Tovar picks me up. We go to the Palisades Mall. All you can play Dave and Buster's game card that night. And then I went back, and we were staying at the Thayer Hotel. Well, one cool thing on your West Point visits is your host is a cadet, obviously, and mine was Thibodeau. He ended up being a starting quarterback there, and just a classy guy. All that rubbed off on me into where you stay in the barracks one night, so you get a taste for the real reality of what you're thinking about embarking into. And he gives up his bed to show the selflessness of a leader. And I just think that, in this day and age, that's something, I don't know if they still do it, but that stuck with me of just, what the military is all about and what it would, prove to be, and the class that comes out of there and just the program. So, there's a lot of stories there, but, it's where they freed up the activities one night, and they were having a 500th ball, which is a 500 days until the juniors graduate. And, ultimately, we were throwing snowballs, and long story short, we hit somebody, wrong person with the snowball, and we get into a little scuffle and whatnot. Well, fast forward the story, I'm in Afghanistan, in a chow hall in eastern Afghanistan, and I worked for 3 ground force commanders on the Ranger side, and they were all '07 graduates, and they, it's a small world, and an even smaller world out of the alumni pool when you're in the same class. And I told him the story, and he goes, "No shit, that was you." And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I had heard about that story, and I did. It's funny that you put 1 and 2 together." But so it really came down to OU and the academies, and to go to OU, it really came down to Frank Solich. Yeah, people can say, hey, it's the biggest offer you had. Well, arguably, the academies are, right there, if not more, and especially where I was at in life. But it came down to Frank Solich and just the way that Nebraska sat in my head to say, hey, I have this opportunity to go play in the MAC conference, stay close to home. There was a lot of output from the MAC at that time. And then with Coach Solich, just his mentality to say, hey, look, this is what we do. This is the process that we do it. We're going to develop you. And it was just, I felt like a good fit for that system. Now, they had signed Brandon Jones, who's a 3-star guy, and had some offers. I didn't really care because at that point in time, hey, I want to go be a part of a winning program. And, I had already had offers as a linebacker and different things. And, hey, I want to go here. I want to develop. I want to play my heart out. And, I think I could have been a good fit. And really that paired with, look, you're only a kid once. OU, Athens, Ohio University, that's the college definition. You look under Webster and the stereotypical college definition, it's hard to beat a place like Athens. And I said, this is the only time in my life that I can come down here and behave like this where it's socially acceptable. And that paired with Frank Solich is the reason that I jumped OU over, the academies, over Elon, and over some of the other interests that I had.
That's awesome, man. Talking about Frank Solich, man, trademark wins in Athens when we were there. Let's talk about the Ohio Pitt game. Absolute classic. Tyler Palko, Mr. Pick Six himself. He threw not one, but 2 pick sixes, 3 interceptions in one game. Like literally, that might be the worst quarterbacking performance I've ever seen in my life, Febus.
It was. It really was. And I mentioned, Brady and such. I was actually up in South Bend to watch Palko versus Notre Dame like the year prior, in which Palko and Pitt pulled it off. And that's where he had to slip up in profanity in the post game. And, so you already got a look and feel for what Tyler Palko was all about. And he was very outspoken. And to tell you the truth, when Pitt came into Pete Stadium, there was absolutely zero respect. They had no interest in being there. They wanted to prove themselves because they just got slaughtered again by Notre Dame that following year, that year, the game prior to when we faced them in Athens. And, the respect and the way that they really came in and had no appetite to even think that we were a threat. That was my first game, and I was redshirting that year. And, the stadium and the fans, it filled up so fast. You had the power sticks. You had,
the Thunder Sticks.
The Thunder Sticks. It was filled up so fast. And then ESPN2, and that was when you had Aaron Andrews on the sideline. You had different things to where it was like, man, this is big time. This is awesome. And I don't think that you're talking about 24,000, but when you're in that type of venue tucked along that river, it had the crowd and being brand new. I'm like, this is life, man. This is good. And then to come out and watch, Deion Byram was someone I always respect because I was a scout team quarterback then. And, Deion had gone through some injuries, but he was a sneaky, freaky athlete. And you had a handful of those guys lingering around our roster. And some of them would come to fruition and be names that you're familiar with now. But, Palko coming in there, like I said, Darrell Revis, to see him 3 feet away, sized up, and just to see the size and the power, and for us to come out, Austin Everson grit his way through, Calvin McRae, really just coming into his own for that season and setting the tone, and really just, finding a way to keep it close. So they return that opening kick, and, you thought it was going to kill the momentum, and then we come right back and battle back into the game, and it lingers on. It's just like any underdog. You let them stay around long enough, they'll start to convince themselves they belong. And I think, that paired with the incredible fan support that night, and the fact that, look, Frank Solich was our guy. Hey, I'm Coach Solich's guy. I'm Coach Solich. He was 2 years removed off the national title in Nebraska. It's where it could be just stolen identity, but you felt some of that to where it definitely played off on you, and it played off on those guys. And, many of those folks that were out there, they were Brian Orr recruits. And, I think they saw the opportunity to say, hey, this is a great opportunity to go out here and play against, I think what was the top 25 team. And,
they were 25th in the country.
So hats off to them, to where all of a sudden the way it ended with Deion Byram, not 1 pick six, but like you said, 2, to end it with the walk-off. in overtime, to where I know the story that Calvin shared about, the words that he had with Tyler Palko, but really that was just letting it out to where, hey, found a way to win, and found a way to win against, arguably superior talent in an environment that was just, in my opinion, unprecedented. I never saw it again at Peden, and that carried over into the town that night. And there was couches burned, there was firefighters that had beer bottles thrown at them. Not that I condone that, but it was a wild atmosphere. I'll never forget walking up, I think Union, up from West Green, and just the electric, and thinking, man, what can we do here? And it just piqued the interest, and it started, I guess, the shift. And that was the big win that I think Coach Solich needed, and that we needed desperately, just to, I guess, put a little bit of a stamp on what we were trying to do there.
It's funny. Calvin told me a story about how Dion came up to Calvin in practice before that game. He's like, he's like something about how many steps like Palko dropped. He's like, if he throws a 3-step, I'm jumping it, So basically, like, Dion knew what he's going to do, and he did it both times when he got the picks. So it's pretty funny that Dion basically called that week in practice, and Calvin was just kind of laughing it off that week in practice. He's like, all right, Dion, whatever, man. You know what I mean? Like, he was thinking Dion's crazy, but Dion knew what he's doing, man. That's one of the all-time historic Ohio Bobcat performances, no question about that. And those fireworks that went off after that game. And not only that, like, me storming the field from the end zone. It's one of the few games where I remember the student body clearing the end zone. They were running onto the field before Dion even scored. You know what I mean? That end zone completely cleared before Dion had officially scored. I mean, it was absolutely wild. Not only that, my cell phone, I wasn't getting cell phone service at all that night. It was like the world just stopped in Athens, Ohio. It was something else, man. I know that all the Ohio U students and players will never forget that moment, dude. I remember hanging around the players after that game, and this was before I actually worked with the team a little bit. I just remember, like, being a big college football fan, it was just so cool getting to hang around all the guys. Like, you guys built like a big tunnel on the field, and like all the players were giving all the students high fives. I was just like, man, this is heaven.
It was cool. And it was Stacy Del Simmon was the sideline reporter, not Aaron Andrews. She was the MAC championship, I think, later that year. But to your point, that fireworks and when it went off, and just the dog piles, and it was funny from my perspective, because I'm sitting there feeling like a schmuck. You're in jeans and street clothes and a jersey, and I'm like, man, I feel like a high school Friday night, or like not a Friday night, but a high school day before with the uniform I'm in. So I remember I had to throw pat and go, and little people know that look, you're redshirting. Like, I went to the convocation and won 14 games of beer pong in a row before that game. Because there was a couple Kaufman kids that lived in the combo. And I remember coming in, the whole spray with cologne, chew gum, all this. And I had citrus bubble gum, and people were like, dude, I can smell alcohol out of you, like, at 10-foot radius. I remember Coach G, I think he knew, but he's like, I had to come out and throw pat and go. And I'm thinking in my head, like, I don't even want to be in this jersey. Like, and that was embarrassing, because to me, I had enough pride where it's like, hey, you're redshirting. What's that? That's something you got to get used to. And then from there, you prepare them in practice, but you didn't play a snap. So don't go around beating your chest out. You got a lot of work to do. And I think that was something that overcame me. Honestly, I was drunk. So that's part of the reason why I put myself in that position, to never really take hold. I was just a super immature guy, but, that was one of those things to where, Coach Solich and always believed in a strong walk-on program. And, those walk-ons would come in and they'd be so hungry. And I'm sitting there, feeling down on myself because, look, you didn't play. and this huge game happened. It's awesome, but it wasn't huge. So from then it was like, hey, what do you got to do? And what's this redshirt year really mean to you? And getting in the playbook, getting in the weight room. I was always big into the weight room, but just that next step where there's nothing like your first year of Division I football, no matter what, Power 5 or not, to where you get in that weight room and you're around. It's a different mentality than high school ball. Those are, even though they're young, 18 to 22, and I know the steps to NFL I've been told is even greater, but, just the mentality to where you're dealing, you see a Shane Yates or a Landon Cohen or, some of these guys to where like, look, being 22, 23, that's a lot different than being 17 and a half, being 18. And, that age to where you might have the body of someone different, but the mentality inside, that's some of the biggest shifts that happen where, hey, A, are the lights too bright? And then B, do you have the ability to adjust and level up? And then you have the opportunity to grow. Where are you at in your development patterns where they talk about it in NFL, hey, you might only get 3 snaps. You might not even get the opportunity to show what you got going on, and they might have to make a decision just because it's a business. In college, you might only get, a series here and a series there to where what are meaningful reps. Yeah, you could get a lot of series, with the third string, with the scout team. And I always told those guys in the huddle down there, like, don't act like you're not under constant evaluation. Don't act like you're just going to be grandfathered to the next step. Don't act like because you can come out here and perform to a certain level that you still don't have to prove yourself and have and capitalize when you do get that opportunity. So that was, out of the pit game, when that sobering moment, which obviously based on the story I shared, I needed, from there, it was like, okay, hey, I want this to happen again. And next time I want to be a part of it. Now that never happened, but that was definitely the thought, after that game with how cool it was. But I'll never forget guys that, were in the same street clothes and wearing issued gear, just telling stories of their lifetime, because at that point in time, everyone had, might as well have been Deion Byram with the way they talked when they got up to courtside, and that's for all you OU folks are going to kick out of that. But that was something that, seeing folks and how they reacted to it and who wanted to take credit for it. But really, I always remember Calvin jumping up on the pile, which, our big rivalry at Coffin with Hilliard Davidson. Calvin's been a coach for some time, and that same hard-nosed mentality there, and that same attitude there, to where a lot of times their star running back, will wear the same number, and he'll jump up on the pile. Every time I see that at Coffin, it just takes me back to that day in Athens, to where Calvin jumped up, and little did we know, I don't think we were even convinced of it. But with Deion Byram, I know I'm jumping around there, but the guy went on to play in the NFL. He went on to get active roster snaps and even a couple starts, where Deion Byram was, to me, I don't want to call him a victim of his environment because he went on to be an All-American that year, but to where he, like I said, dealt with injuries, but people slept on Deion. Cat had over a 40-inch vertical. I mean, he had the physical skills, and he was smart. He was savvy, and he was very mature. At that point in time, he was over it, and you see it happen to guys. It happened to me. It happened where you're there long enough, the novelty wears off, and maybe that, people get mad at me saying that, but to where, look, the novelty and the newness had worn off. That guy was a wily vet. He was every bit of the definition.
Absolutely.
So many people come and go out of that locker room, which at OU was just a revolving door. I mean, being in a MAC, the attrition level there, you have, and with the large walk-on program, you just see so many bodies come and go. And, Wayne Horsley's a legend. I can call him that now, but he was a great example of seeing people come and go. I mean, I was number 7. He gave me number 17. Originally when I showed up, I actually had like 3 numbers. I was 11, I was 14, I was 12. I was all over the place. Where I didn't even know, because at the end of the day, my locker number was 101, and it was all over my sweats. And there's nothing more demoralizing than walking around OU campus, as a scholarship guy, for whatever that's worth, with 101 on your sweats, whatever to where it was definitely identifiable. So I didn't wear any of my gear, and a lot of that's what we lived in. I think the funny part is I took it home, and I took an iron to it, and I tried to melt the numbers off, and I tried to sew a patch over it. I'm like, man, I'm not going to have this. But Wayne was, your locker number, that was, and what was on your, normally it was a jersey number, but, 85 or 99 and above, the duplicates, with the 100 numbers, that was your Cubby number. And that was legendary to where Wayne had a half door, and it's still there. Matt Morton was just an assistant at the time. He's the current equipment director. And Wayne, like a lot of these equipment guys, he acted like it was his stuff. And the joke was you thought you went D1 because we had an Adidas contract. But the contract wasn't a contract at all. So I show up and you get these cotton shorts that don't have a logo on them. You get Adidas shirts that had, were gray in the front because they didn't put the logo on them, and just an Adidas sign in the back. They put 101 just to kick you in the teeth. Your socks are always wet, and your cleats, they're detachables. I mean, it was a running joke when I took those home. And I remember Landon like, you got to earn it. You got to earn it. And I'm thinking in my head, I thought this was just going to be, Division I football, but it was gritty and it was early. And like, for instance, we wore, they had palm guards for the gloves back then, and cutters were the rage. But, that year, everyone, in the years before, everyone got palm guards, and they joked around because Master P's name was P. Miller, and they called him the P. Millers. And it was like, man, it was like a chicken feast. You have this Adidas contract, and you're running around with, Percy Miller's on. And the next year, occasionally folks would get Adidas gloves and stuff like that, or they get cutter gloves. And it evolved pretty quick. We signed a deal with Russell that was, Auburn's old deal and such. But still, then it's Russell, and your numbers aren't even tackle twill. They're ironed on. And just those are some of the things where they're first world problems. But when you thought you went D1, where, hey, it is a little bit. And then Wayne was just a funny character because, like I said, I tried to melt it. I tried to sew on a patch. Well, I went to, at that point in time, I think it might have still been Galleons or Dick's Sporting Goods up in Dublin off the sawmill there. And my mom bought me a pair of Adidas shorts that were mesh and, a couple shirts and such like that. And Mike Mitchell came in my recruiting class as well. And, Wayne had a policy, no personal items on your laundry boots. Well, I'm like, man, I'm not wearing these shorts. Like, I'm not asking you guys to do much for me, but these are junk, man. And these cleats, they're going to hurt my feet. Like, come on. And, I put my personal loop on. Well, back then I was the first one of the first classes where you could come in for summer school and start your scholarship. At that point in time, future guys and prep school guys could come in the spring. But to be out of high school, I was like one of the first. There's 5 guys. It was like Chris Garrett, myself, Brandon Jones. I want to say Jason White and one other person. Well, anywho, we came in early, and I was living in Bromley at the time. And, it was 30 of us in Bromley. And, I came back and did my summer school, and I didn't even go to class. I mean, I got to be honest with you, Wade. It's just, I didn't even go to class. And I think I finished with like a C- and a D. And I hadn't seen Coach Alvin, my offensive coordinator, since maybe I signed. And I'd seen him here and there. And then Jason Kelly was our academic advisor at the time. He calls me in, hey, Josh, da-da-da-da. And Coach Alvin absolutely tore into me because of my grades. Well, I say all that to say it was a rough summer for me. It was one of adjustment. It was one that got me redshirted. It was one that led to a lot of different things, but where ultimately I was just a knucklehead. And with the shorts, I was like, this is one thing I can control. So I wore those shorts down the stretch. You come back and you report for fall camp. We got like a couple weeks off. I come back and I said, hey, Wayne, where's my shorts at? And he goes, actually, Josh, they fit quite nicely. And I looked down, and this guy's got my shorts on. He's got my Adidas shorts on, and I laughed at him, and I was pissed. And at that point, I had no leverage, I had no clout, and he knew it. And and it was just funny like that. So I ended up with like I said, the duplicate number 7, locker number 101, and from there it was okay, time to get to work. And I got in the weight room. I put on good weight, got a lot stronger. But for me, it wasn't necessarily strength or size, as much as it was speed and explosiveness, and just the twitch muscles that had to be a quarterback in that system. You had to have it to a certain level. So I came out and, redshirt freshman year, able to, come out and have a good fall camp. And fortunately for me, I played kickoff that year. And I was the 7th man on kickoff. And, back then there were wedges. And I keep saying back then, like I'm that old.
Yeah, they eliminated the wedges.
And I'll never forget we were playing against Illinois. Well, that year we probably talked about the Northern Illinois game. We also played Rutgers. We played Missouri. We played, Rutgers with Ray Rice, 14-0. We love it. That was that team. But I'll never forget against Illinois.
Yeah, Northern Illinois or Illinois?
No,
Illinois
at Illinois when we won.
Yeah, Mark Parson had that pick. Yeah,
he did. Yeah, but tell Mark Parson, and Mark, if you're listening, you got to catch it with your hands. That thing, he double caught that thing, and Mark doesn't have any hands, and that's why he was a DB, but he'll never admit that. But that year though, I was 7th, and Josh Abrams, who ended up being a special team just phenom, he was the guy next to me. He was the 6th man, and that was always a backup running back. And Ross Ells, who ended up being a defensive coordinator at Purdue and different places, he was a special teams coordinator. He said, "Look, kickoff team's all about heart." He's like, "You can have speed, but you can time up the kick, and you have the guts to keep your nose into it. Go get after it." So, Josh Abrams, man, I call it like a bad Revolutionary War movie because I just watched him run to his death time and time again. He would make plays and stuff like that, but hitting that back wedge, I mean, just such a selfless sacrifice. And from there, to be a couple other folks that would throw their heads in there. And that game in particular, they had a crosswalk on the back wedge. And you knew with Rashard Mendenhall, his arms were bigger than my legs.
Yeah, Mendenhall was a thick dude, man. Jesus.
And so I'm sitting there thinking that I got to bring it. I said, I got to bring it. I got to bring it because he's full run, I'm full run. And that team, they left me unblocked. So I'm thinking, you talk about being in the zone and the time that slowed down. That was a time this is a great example of that didn't come to mind, and because it was a bad zone. I focused in on Rashard. I'm ready to just clean his clock, so I think, and all of a sudden the Big Ten fullback comes from 50 yards away and cleans me up. And I'm telling you, Wade, I didn't take too many L's on this. I had good leverage. He put me 5 yards in the air, and Brad Bauer was a transfer from Illinois. He was in tears laughing. Austin Everson was in tears laughing. I couldn't breathe. I was wheezing. I kept poking my ribs to think if they were fractured because I was wheezing. And the kicker was it happened again. You think I would learn my lesson, but it was just like it was the temptation I couldn't ignore, and I ran through there, and he cleaned me up again, and that finished me up. And I think the next game, we had like a couple of games left in the year. The Kent State game, they put Von Kerry Owens there, and because I think Coach Solich, even though I had a handful of tackles, I think that was what are we doing here? But
dude,
no, it was awesome.
That's an epic memory, dude. I always love hearing about hard hits. Talk to me about the Northern Illinois game, Josh. I know you mentioned that. Calvin talked about that game too. That was definitely one of the classic Ohio U wins. Definitely one of the biggest wins in Ohio U football history because Garrett Wolf, as I told you, led the nation in rushing yardage that year. Absolute stud.
It was. I mean, you talk about being spoiled. I mean, with the first game in Athens, the Pitt game, this was one of my first MAC games on the road, and DeKalb was packed. I mean, the first two plays of the offensive possession, those that were there and those that can remember, I mean, we were false starts because it was so loud in that place because there was such an excitement around Garrett Wolf and that Northern Illinois team. And that was, like I said, we identified ourselves with Coach Solich and with that toughness. And that was the first time when you could look around people's eyes that, hey, look, he'd been there a year. A lot of the guys, the Tyler Russes, the Matt Muncies, the Calvins, the Austins, the folks there, the Paul Johnsons, the Matt Millers, they had been around, and seen all, like I said, people come and go. That's just a constant theme in that locker room. To where this was the first time where it's like, hey, let's get ours. It's time to have a product where it's not a fluke, where it's not just a feel good, where, hey, let's make a statement in the MAC. And there's no better place. And that's where you could tell, because you don't travel, especially for a league game, that many folks. So it was a very intimate locker room. And that was where you looked around and you just saw people's look in their eye. The Jameson Harkeys, who was my age, younger guys, Mike Mitchell, different things. TJ Wright was a big inspiration that year. The Landon Cohen, you just saw that switch in their eyes and then to go out. And, hey, it was a back and forth. And I remember with Mike Hinton, he was a transfer. And, those that are familiar, I mean, he was a 4 or 5-star guy. I mean, Bobby Bowden, or I think it was Bobby Bowden, offered him as a wide receiver. I mean, this cat, NC State, Virginia Tech. I mean, he got caught up in some extracurriculars, but a nice guy. I mean, came in and just overall was nothing but a classy individual, and but a physical phenom. And they called him the Predator. And
oh yeah, dude, that guy was just carved from granite. I remember watching him in practice. He would always have the skull cap, and like looking at his body, dude, it was the most sculpted body I saw during my time at OU. He was just like a freaking statue, dude. He was built.
Yeah, one is not like the others. When you saw Mike Kent, I mean, it was like Terrell Owens in the locker room. I mean, just to see, and even throwing with them. Like I'll be the first one to brag about my arm, right, wrong, and different. Where arm talent's never been the question, and you could challenge guys on routes, and hey, can they get there? Get the speed to where with Mike Hinton throwing routes with him, it was just a different level. I remember when Taylor Price was, it was the year he beat out. Brandon Tate made that. I think the active roster had a hell of a preseason, that year for New England. And it was a 7-step hitch to where I was in gun. And by the time I got the snap, he was out of that cut. To where that was the first time where, look, I've never been challenged on any routes. Where, Mike Kenton had that same type of speed and twitch. And the crazy part about that Northern Illinois game, to stay on topic, is just, look, Garrett Wolf folded around the right side, and Mike Kenton were like, oh, this is it. This is where we show our stud. Garrett Wolf was out of there. And it was like everyone sort of looked around like, oh, man, what are we into? If he just did that to Mike Kenton, and that was one of those gut check moments where you just have two, I don't want to call us prize fighters by any means, because there you are in DeKalb, but to where it was two hungry programs that had nice talent that were just exchanging. And you look at Austin Everson, where no one would ever use the word prolific passer, but he was there and he was gritty and he was a leader, and he sat there, and Will Norwood, I will always say a big bodied, strong receiver, that only had 1 year at OU, where he caught a post over the middle to where I called it, the Peyton Manning jizz ball, to where, it was a duck end over end. It had that Peyton Manning flop to it, but it came down. I mean, Everson, I can go ahead and make jabs now. I played over him, but, it looked like a Wakefield knuckle, and coming down into to take that thing and drop it the way it did, you knew we were onto something that day. So to come out and have that offensive breakout, with Everson having a great game, statistically speaking, and, the team win, that was the first, time I said I saw that killer instinct, and the folks to say, hey, we have it. And then to go out there and do it in that environment, to where, hey, we cut our teeth that day. And it definitely will go down and set the tone for the run to the MAC championship that year. Because it didn't start out that hot, all the way around, to where, we needed that win as a program. We needed that win for that season, and we got it. And then to have it over a Garrett Wolf competitor, who at that point in time was, one of the top backs in the country, at the MAC level, that was awesome. So that was a game where I'll never forget, Coach Derek Mason, just to see these guys, I could see their faces right now, and just, there was a sense of relief. Those guys that were there before, they weren't used to those types of victories, in that fashion. And I could see to them like, hey, this is why we stuck it out. This is why we cut our teeth. This is, the Tyler Russes that were just mature elder statesmen, that were savvy, and I think if you look at the core group that carried over from, Coach Norwood to Coach Solich, it was just a savvy, mature group that had, they were a very intelligent group. And they had high football IQ. And then, like the Michael Grahams of the world, they found a way to get it done. And they gave it everything that they had. And then there were times where, hey, look, you're just beat at birth. And if someone could expose that, they did at times. But, we did a good job of keeping ourselves in the fight.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. Talk to me about winning the Akron game and punching your ticket to the MAC championship. That was the first time Ohio got to the MAC championship game since 1968. Talk to me about that experience, Febus.
Yeah, we knew, we lost a tough game early on to Bowling Green, and Everson got knocked out, and it was from there, I didn't know which way we were going to go. And actually, little people know, like I talked to Coach Solich after that. I said, look, you got the same X's and O's and the same Jimmys and Joes. I don't see where this is going to change. But the reality is, like that group that, displayed leadership, it's Shane Yates on that team who was really just such an unheralded leader. For that Akron game, you knew you had the opportunity to go, and you're going up against Luke Getsy and a nice Akron offense. And, at that point in time, we had great momentum. There was a great vibe and feel to it. And, I think Everson sprained his ankle that night really bad. And that was, made it again, not to make it about me, but that was a moment for me where I'm like, man, this is awesome. We're going to the MAC championship. Austin Everson, sprained his ankle. He was our leader. He was the heart, and of that offense.
He's very good at taking care of the football. He very rarely turned over the football. He was very good at managing the game.
He had to. And at that point in time, that was a big part of it. And that's where I definitely fell short and where I think there was an evolution as well, is that we ran combos where, they would send in 3 plays at a time. And you get this blitz look to where Coach Godowski, that's why he's at where he's at right now, is, SEC OC. Vandy, that he would dial it up to where, look, Austin would go to the line and have 3 plays based on the looks where they're bluffing their looks. And he would be right. And to tell you the truth, he got us in the majority of the right plays. And, cerebral capacity that he had. And obviously he was a very intelligent guy, would go on, in the very popular and acclaimed Master of Sports Administration and Business. But, the guy was just intelligent, football IQ, and to get us in the right plays and have the maturity to do that. And people don't realize he held off Brad Bauer. Brad Bauer came in from Illinois getting, playing time very early on at Illinois and was a top 5 quarterback recruit. To Brad Bauer came in and he could just never really step down on, Austin's tenure. Austin just grinded it out. And to see those 2 guys compete and just the maturity that they brought to the game, I can't say it rubs off on me. I don't think they'll tell you it rubs off on me, but to see it, I definitely had some good examples of what right looks like from a preparation standpoint and from just a maturity standpoint.
Talk to me about the MAC championship game and watching Dan Lefevre up close, and what a special player he was. I mean, that team had Dan Lefevre, Brian Anderson, and Antonio Brown. I said in, I think the last podcast with Dad Turner, how Brian Anderson's like the forgotten receiver of that group. I mean, everyone remembers Antonio Brown, but that receiving core with Antonio Brown and Brian Anderson was one of the best in college football and MAC history. And a lot of people really forget about Brian Anderson, but we had such a great secondary that year. And, great Nick Saban has always said, you cannot defend a perfect pass. And in that game, Dan Lefevre just threw perfect pass after perfect pass, and there was nothing we could do about it.
Yeah, I think that was, we talk about the physicality, and I off the air, we talked about just the evolution of the physicality. And I think that's a program under Brian Kelly that had recruited well. And that's an understatement to where I'm not sure if AD was there that MAC championship game. I know because he and JJ Watt, to where Brian Anderson definitely tall, lanky, nice receiver, it was an Ontario Sneed, the back out of the backfield, Dan Lefevre, to where with the Akron game, we went through the Akron game. We won that. Great. MAC East, we know we're preparing it. The next week we played Miami of Ohio. I told you Austin hurt his ankle. Well, I'm back up. Brad starts. Brad goes in, has a pretty good game. Well, little do we know, Brad also liked to cramp up. And no matter how much Gatorade he would drink, so here comes this knucklehead, Josh Febus, into the game. And, end up scoring the game winner. Well, those are really, and when it was all said and done, the only tick that I really got significant at quarterback, outside of, dish rag time. And, scoring that game winner was good for me. But, with Everson, his ankle was, 50-50. We didn't know what it was going into the MAC championship. So preparation, we knew he was a game time decision, but he ate up the reps. Brad ate up all the reps. And there I am, not really. I think, hell, I was still down on scout team and, and signaling in and such like that. Well, that game that night, going up against Brian Kelly, showing up, talking about seeing the physicality, Central Michigan did not look like a MAC team. And little did we know they wouldn't play like a MAC team either. Brian Kelly schematically had them dialed in, and Dan Lefevre was an all-time MAC great quarterback. He was a dual threat. I mean, I think he broke Vince Young's record or tied or did something with, the 3,000 and 1,000.
Oh, yeah. He put up monster numbers, dude.
He was dialed in. I mean, and to where he was accurate. You talk about being on his own. You need him on this show because that night he didn't miss it. I mean, he didn't miss a throw that wasn't contested because you talk about it. Mark Parson was really stepped up as a young guy at corner. You had T.J. Wright, the other corner, who was just a scrapper that just put up solid production. You had Todd Koenig and Mike Mitchell, back at safeties. And obviously Mike, we know his career. Todd Koenig was just a leader. I mean, he's a SEAL now, Navy SEAL now. And Todd Koenig, I mean, ultimately that guy, he was a stud, and he had gone through a tough ankle sprain because earlier that year, was that the same year that we played Julian Edelman and we didn't know that.
Oh,
Julian
yeah, dude. Julian Edelman was so hard to tackle. My God.
He was, and he did that to us. And unfortunately, Todd sprained his ankle that game. But, he to where that secondary, like you said, hey, they would come up and smack you. They could guard you. And, the reality is we were schemed up and Brian Kelly had a great plan, but Dan threw from a clean pocket all night. I mean, Dan really could stand tall, deliver the thread. And then, like you said, when you got guys and athletes in the perimeter like that, I mean, he put them in some tough spots. And I remember Mitchell get an interception that night. That was about the only error that, Lefevre made all night. Outside of that, he got him in the right plays. You could just, the composure, and he was a freshman, to come out and do that. You knew that he was going to be a force. And, Brian Kelly, I keep mentioning that name, you just saw the demeanor in their team. They had that level of polish that you didn't see many times in the MAC. And, that game was, that was the Erin Andrews game. I keep mentioning her because there she is, and Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler. And you see these guys in the hotels. And, that was an ESPN2 game, and it wasn't an ESPN2 buried on, a random Tuesday night. I mean, that was primetime television. I think it might have been a Thursday night game or something.
Oh yeah, I was so excited to tell my dad, like, Dad, I'm going to be at the game. Like, watch the game on ESPN.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, and for us to have that story, a Northern Illinois game from that whole path, that to be a part of that, the comeback journey to beat Miami. So we'd never beat Miami. During my time, the year before, we got blown out at home. To battle the bricks, get your mug, to win the MAC, to go to the MAC championship, and then to get called into duty, the way that I did. And it's funny because, my buddies still rag on me about, some of the things that Herbstreit said, but it was a night where, hey, I went in there with no reps and really, I was fresh off a kickoff game. I mean, so there you are. And I'll never forget, the little cameras that zip over the field. I'm sitting there getting ready to call play, and it wasn't like it was over the top loud. It wasn't. But to where I hear this, and it's this camera right above me.
The sky cam.
What is that? And then another time where I came off the sideline, and I hadn't even had time to warm up because it was cramped. And it was like, let's go, TV, get going. And I hadn't even warmed up, and I think I went out there, and it was a hitch. And Taylor Price was out there, and I'm like, man, I know I can rely on Taylor. You had Cheeto Wakocha. He was a reliable, guy. And then you had, at that point in time, you had Scott Mail, who was just, the phenom. He was it, physicality-wise. And, with Taylor, we ran a hitch, and it got knocked down. I remember just saying, okay, hey, calm down, got it. And we, you get into your, get into the game where, okay, hey, I'm seeing the signal. I'm getting the play call. Some of the simple things that you haven't done when you've been riding the pine for 2 years. And you forget how perishable that skill is, to where I don't care how much spring ball you go to. I don't care how much to where actually you do it, because during the season, you might get reps at the end of the, end of the practice, where we didn't have an indoor facility at the time. But by the time at that point in time in the year, it got cold in Peavy Stadium, especially when you're preparing for the MAC championship. And I'll tell you, by the time I got any reps, it was pretty much a handoff and let's get the hell out of here. It wasn't, to where I couldn't even throw because I couldn't even feel my hands. And so we're getting back into the theme of things. Oh, here it is on national TV. That's not an excuse as much to say it's pretty funny to think, hey, I was just going to go out there and let it rip. And second, play out there, Scott Mail, I see him and they're in a loose coverage, and I say, I don't care. This guy runs a 4.1. He high jumps out of this world, long jumps even further. Let's just let it ride. And he got bumped off course and whatnot, but hell, I didn't even look off. I'm going there hell or high water. That's just where we were at that night.
That's my guy.
Yeah, let it rip. I pitch and throw the bitch. I mean, it was just it was out of gun, but I just let it ride. And from there, Brad came back from the cramps and whatnot, and I think we malingered on, and Dan Lefevre and that momentum, we couldn't stop it. But it was a tough loss to take. It was something again that I took very, very personal. But at the same time, that was a little bit different than the Pitt game, because it was like, look, man, I haven't had a rep in ages. The Miami game, I went in there and handed off on a speed sweep to Chris Garrett and went down through trying to throw a block that sprung him a little bit, and then you boot around for a 1-yarder. That's not really getting significant snaps. So, if Everson and Bauer are listening, I really appreciate the preparation, the great example I got those 2 weeks to prepare, because that didn't happen.
Yeah,
it did.
It's funny that you mentioned you played in the MAC championship game. I completely forgot about your reps in that game until you just mentioned it just now.
Listening to the Flow Theory Podcast. You can listen to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and TuneIn.